Good morning, good afternoon. It's June 10th, 2020. This is another episode of For Our People. Ordinarily, we're Mondays at 11 a.m. Out of Hakim's Bookstore, representing for Hakim's Bookstore in West Philadelphia, 210 South 52nd Street, between Walnut and Chancellor. A little late this week. Better late than never. My 50th birthday was actually on Monday, so thank you. A lot of people are denied the pleasure of turning 50, and I'm extremely excited about this next phase, 0 to 25, 25 to 50, and then 50 to 75. I'm excited about getting it in. So part of that is because I like doing this every week for our people. We're going to talk black books, black scholarship, black intelligence. We're going to support, and today's theme, defund the police. What does that mean, right? So we're not going to dwell on it, but I do want to speak on it before we talk about the books, our books of the week. So, remember that we're repping for Hakim's Bookstore, 210 South 52nd Street, owned by Miss Yvonne Blake, 60 years in the game since 1959. Oldest black bookstore on the East Coast, second oldest in the country. You can check us out on HakimsBookstore.com, Hakim's Bookstore on Instagram, Hakim's Bookstore on Facebook. You can also check out my videos. This I do every week. I also do the weekly scholarship digest for the Economic Justice Law Review. You can check out my stuff on AfrolanticanJurisprudence at YouTube. You know, one of the things that we're going to have to do, high on my list, is to start taking advantage of the technology that allows me to have captions and whatnot when I talk about terms and books and whatnot. So, number one, these things with Zoom and meetings and video stuff, we're going to start interviewing the actual authors of these books at some point. Number two, we need to do I got to do some graphics and whatnot so we can have some visual content to complement what I'm talking about when we talk about these books, when I talk about these people. And we're going to talk about some amazing books and some amazing people today. All right, so who am I? Andre Smith, Smitty Bonton, West Philly native, law professor for 15 years at American Association of Law School Institutions, Howard University, Widener, Penn State, Florida International University. I retired back in 2017, and since then it's been my mission to try to bring black scholarship out of the ivory tower into the streets. So this is what we're going to do. So this is what we're doing week to week with For Our People, with the Economic Justice Law Review. Shout out to my partners and my peoples at the Africa Sports Venture Group and everybody else that Michael Coard, brother Michael X, and his great work in Philadelphia. And speaking of Michael X, I'm sure he is probably even more strident than defund the police. On the left side of defund the police is abolish the police. We've talked in the past about the abolition movement, that if slavery by a name is represented by the over-incarceration of black people and then the forcing of us to work for pennies on the dollar, because the 13th Amendment allows involuntary servitude for the duly convicted. If we're suggesting that we're slaves until today, but the black police officer not see it that way, remember that from KRS-One? Well, if that's the case, then that would naturally spark an abolition movement. Now, to the immediate right of the abolition movement is, instead of abolishing police, instead of abolishing prisons, it would be to defund them, right? Defunding not as in zero in the budget, but plain and simply, after the performances of the police and the unprofessionalism that we've seen across the world, shooting journalists and whatnot from Australia, should that performance warrant more investment or less investment, right? That's as simple as we can put defund the police, right? That it will not go away. On the other hand, should we invest more public dollars into it or less public dollars into it? And so let me give you some other reasons, right? I was talking to someone else about it, and here are my reasons why I agree with the concept of defunding the police or reducing the amount that's allocated to policing in the budget. Why? Because cities and states all around the country, particularly on the East Coast, are 2 cents from bankruptcy. We don't talk about that enough. We're focused on our immediate problems. I'm sorry, folks. We're focused on our immediate problems. And if we look from a macro level, and I think that's my job here, is to look at things from a macro and even global level. And the United States is financially in a precarious position, to put it kindly. We can keep printing money to keep going along as we're doing, but if any other country prints money at the rate that we are printing money, we would call them a third world country or undisciplined or what have you. More than that, states and cities have these, not only are broke today because of starve the beast tax policies, man, the pension obligations that they owe to their union members who are now of retirement age is immense. It is a ticking time bomb, right? So, these cities are 2 cents from bankruptcy, and rich white folks who live there still don't want to pay their taxes, even for the department that protects their property. So if rich white people aren't going to pay for it, then why should we increase the budget of police departments? And because the cities make up those budget gaps by policing black people for profit, right? So another reason to reduce the numbers of police. Because on top of that, the funds that we do allocate to the police, what do they use them for? Philadelphia is one of the worst abusers in the country when it comes to civil asset forfeiture, that even the conservative Heritage Club has come out against it. And even the Supreme Court has moved the cabinet in a little known case called Timms versus United States. Because after their performance on camera for the whole world to see, any other business would get less investors and funding, not more, because nothing about those slick and sexy riot gear uniforms we as citizens paid for kept the peace or protected those stores. So you want to keep talking about increasing their budget, giving them military hardware, giving them military weapons, tanks, and all types of stuff. When it came down to it, and there were peaceful protests with just a few provocateurs, couldn't handle it. So we're putting more money into an organization that can't protect the peace. If poor people decide, there will be no peace. So how do we make sure that poor people decide that they do in fact want peace? How about, because the money to buy all that riot gear could have funded summer youth jobs that we used to get to keep out of trouble? Right, so when we're talking about defunding the police, we're talking about reallocating that money to programs that actually will protect public safety. If it is not, in fact, protecting public safety, then it needs to be reduced. And conservatives, right, should be happy about this, right? The conservative argument against big government is that once you start a big government program, you can never reduce its budget regardless of its ineffectiveness. Well, that's what we're trying to do, right? Because we're being pragmatic. We're not attaching ourselves to any political theory. We're being very pragmatic and saying this government institution is not serving the people in the way that it ought to, and therefore divestment is in fact necessary. So that's why this particular episode is dedicated to the mantra or the call or the protest, a demand to defund the police. I think it will work because, again, if you're a fan of Derek Bell's interest convergence theory, those things that we ask for have to also benefit elite white folks if we have any hope of getting it passed legislatively. And in this instance, elite white folks don't want to pay their taxes. So if we reduce the budget, if our proposal is part of reducing the budget, it is very likely, I think, that they're eventually going to go for it, because that's what they wanted to do anyway. There are academic conferences going on right now with academics, city government bean counters, talking about pension reform, which is just a fly way of saying, how do we screw people out of their pensions? So one thing that I think we are going to agree with is that rogue cops, violent cops, should not live out the rest of their days in comfort due to pensions funded by the people, especially through these fines, fees, and forfeitures through black people paying for it. All right. Let's step from defunding the police to recognizing a long-term activist who passed recently, Conrad Worrill. Right, and again, we're talking about black Afrocentric, black nationalist thinkers and writers and scholars. Brother Worrill taught at Northeastern Illinois University for more than 40 years, and whose activism has been at the forefront of social and racial justice. I'm reading this from their website. African-centered education, African liberation, and self-determination for people of African descent. He died on June 3rd after battling several major illnesses. He was 78 years old. Worrill's research and writings have advanced causes in educational restructuring, human rights, reparations, and political and economic empowerment for the community for more than a half a century. He retired in 2016. He was named Professor Emeritus. Prior to joining Northeastern Illinois University, Worrill was the coordinator of urban programs and assistant professor at George Williams College. He served in leadership roles in numerous organizations, including, you may have heard of these folks, National Black United Front and the Black United Fund of Illinois. He was also active with NCOBRA, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. There's a lot of people talking about reparations right now, but know that the National Coalition for Blacks for Reparations in America, NCOBRA, has been doing it for a long time, so we know that they're not doing it on behalf of any political party, that they're doing it on behalf of black people. And some of y'all know exactly what I'm talking about with that. He was also a special consultant for the 1995 Million Man March. In 1983, Worrill helped organize to elect Chicago's first black mayor, Harold Washington. Right? You can win, Harold Washington. And co-funded the Task Force for Black Political Empowerment. He traveled to Geneva, Switzerland in '97 with a delegation to formally charge the U.S. government with genocide and human rights violations before the Commission on Human Rights. So I know a part of that movement was my mentor, Lisa Kroons, at Howard University while I was a student there. She was very much a part of that movement to push our human rights agenda to the United Nations, along with Conrad Worrill. He presented that petition to the United Nations in 2001, led a 400-member delegation to the UN World Conference Against Racism in Durban, South Africa. He was also, similar to this show, he was the host of WVON's On Target and a key figure in the Great Black Music Project, which sponsors the Jazzy Monday series at CCICS. So shout out to the brother, the recent ancestor, Conrad Worrill. Rest in power, look over us, guide over us, right? That's the third thing. We need some music. So I wish right now I could play Sizzla Kalonji's Guide Over Us, right? Guide Over Us, Conrad Worrill. Before we get to the books, we got a bunch of stuff before we get to the books. We are going to get to the books, but we stay with this issue of black intelligence, black academics, right? And here we're going to talk about black bookstores, right? We're going to have a program talking about Save Black Bookstores. This entire podcast at some point will be within a greater online portal dedicated to saving black bookstores, black colleges and universities, black homeschools, black charter schools, as a way to support black intelligence. So, in honor of all the black bookstores on top of Hakim's, 210 South 52nd Street, beautiful West Philly, between Walnut and Chancellor, here's a list of 47 black bookstores as accounted for by Duende District Bookstore. And not only are these 47 bookstores in effect, there are more. Because I looked at the ones in Philadelphia, and they didn't even get all of them. They didn't get Black and Noble. They didn't get Amalgam. Right, so I am very heartened by the fact that there is Mahogany Books in Washington. We'll do a roll call again. If we have some graphics at some point, we'll have them at the bottom of the screen, so I won't have to just shout them out. But I have no problem spending a little time shouting out brothers and sisters. Support these institutions if you live near. Mahogany Books in Washington, Loyalty Bookstore in Washington, when I say Washington, I mean the DMV. Loyalty Bookstore in Silver Spring, Maryland. The Lit Bar in Bronx, New York. Cafe Con Libros in Brooklyn. And I want to say Aqib Talib has a black bookstore in Brooklyn as well. Uncle Bobby's, Mark Lamont Hill's store in Germantown, Philadelphia. Brian Laird Books in South Bend, Marcus Books, oldest black bookstore in the country in Oakland, California. They have their own GoFundMe page that you can donate to. Hakim's Bookstore also has a GoFundMe page, so go to gofundme.com/Hakim's Bookstore if you are able to contribute. Sankofa Books in Washington, Pyramid Art Books and Custom Framing in Little Rock. Shout out to Arkansas. Ashe by the Bay, Vallejo, California. Isowan Books in LA. Underground Books in Sacramento. Cultured Books in St. Petersburg. Major Books in Claymont, Delaware. Beyond Barcodes Bookstore in Kokomo, India. Semicolon Bookstore, Chicago. Harriet's Bookstore. That's a new one that's up in Philadelphia, right? Maydew Bookstore in Atlanta. Detroit Book City in Southfield, Michigan. Revolution Books in Berkeley, California. Sisters Uptown Bookstore in NY. Source Booksellers in Detroit. Willis Books in Kansas City, Missouri. Carol's Bookstore in Sacramento. I see a couple Sacramentos in there. So do it, y'all. Dare Books in Longwood, Florida. The Listening Tree, Decatur, Georgia. Book Boutique in Atlanta. Nubian Bookstore in Morrow, Georgia. Lucena Books in Bensonville, Illinois. The Book Joint in Chicago. I like that. I went to a restaurant called That Steak Joint in Chicago. I hope it's just as good. That was awesome. For Keeps Books in Atlanta, Between the Lines Bookstore in Baton Rouge. Frugal Bookstore in Roxbury, Mass. Olive Tree Books and Voices, Springfield, Mass. Books and Crannies, Martinsville, Virginia. All right. I see you, Central Virginia. I See Me, University City, Missouri. Zawadi Books, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Yoruba Bookstore in Brooklyn, NY. Smith and Hannon in Cincinnati. Zawadi Books, it's all actually in Columbus. Mocha Books is actually in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The Black Reserve in Lansdale, PA. Turning Page Bookshop, Goose Creek, South Carolina. Enda's Boutique, all right, in Duncanville, Texas. Shout out. The Dock in Fort Worth, Texas. Black World Books in Killeen, Texas. Harambe Books in Alexandria, and Riches in Reading by Maryland City, Maryland. Again, I'm sure there are plenty of black bookstores that we have left out. So if you know of a black bookstore that we left out in that list, please put them in the comment section. Like I said earlier, this podcast or this show, whatever you want to call it, will eventually grow into a support system for all centers of black intelligence. And we'll be doing some fundraising and sponsoring programs to make sure that we all flourish in the 21st century and beyond. All right, you want to talk about some books? Let's talk about new books that have come out very recently. As identified, I actually got a couple books from, again, Mark Anthony Neal's podcast and Facebook presence, New Black Man in Exile, and he also has another one called Left of Black. There's also, again, the Journal of Blacks in Higher Education that puts out a weekly book list. So these books come mainly from those sources. However, if I see other books that are put out, like, again, Del Wright, my colleague, my brother Chip Wright, A Short and Happy Guide to Bitcoin, Cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, Cryptocurrency, and Blockchain, right? By Del Wright, Chip Wright. Anybody in University of Maryland, you know Chip. Harvard, you know Chip. University of Chicago, you know Chip. Valparaiso, you know Chip. Y'all may know him as Del Wright, but we know him as Chip. Whatever name he goes by or chooses for himself, right? We're going to big you up. We're going to promote your book. A Short and Happy Guide to Bitcoin, Cryptocurrency, and Blockchain. See, I memorized it off the top of the dome, right? All right, other new books that are out: Bad Bitches and Sassy Supermamas. I wanted to, look, I'm in the academic setting, so anytime I get a chance to be a little gully, I'm going to take it. Bad Bitches and Sassy Supermamas, Black Power Action Films by Stephanie Dunn of Urbana and Chicago, University of Illinois Press. This is a very interesting book by a professor that specializes in media, right? In media representations of black folks. And we have a couple books on that theme. As a matter of fact, the second book on the list is written by Professor Dr. Frederick Gooding, right? Frederick Gooding Jr. I want to say he is a assistant professor at Texas Christian University, TCU. He has also written about race in the media in a book called Black Oscars, From Mammy to Minnie, What the Academy Awards Tell Us About African Americans. All right, by Frederick Gooding Jr. It is published by Rowman and Littlefield Publishers. I've actually published with them before. Second only to the Super Bowl in audience size and revenue, the Oscars are more than a mere ceremony. They are a phenomenon. Hosted by the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts, and Sciences for over 90 years, the Oscars have long been considered the pinnacle of fantasy, beauty, romance, and high class. They are eagerly anticipated and are heavily discussed. It is only recently that movements such as Oscars So White have raised awareness around the more complicated legacy of the Oscars and African American participation in film. You could have also cited Public Enemy's Burn, Hollywood Burn, but you know, whatever. The timely book draws on African American, and film history to reflect on how the Oscars have recognized blacks from the award's inception to the present. Starting in the 1920s, the chapters provide a thorough analysis and overview of any black actors nominated for their Hollywood roles during each decade. By cross-referencing historical trends with prior winners, readers will be able to see consistent patterns when it comes to black characters in film and ultimately judge whether mainstream race relations has truly changed substantively or only superficially over time. Of course, we know who that's written for. We know the deal. Frederick Gooding, a.k.a. Dr. G, again, is an assistant professor of African American Studies within the Honors College at TCU. A trained historian, Gooding most effectively analyzed contemporary mainstream media with a careful eye for persistent patterns along racial lines that appear benign, but indeed have problematic historical roots. As such, Gooding's most well-known thus far is You Mean There's Race in My Movie, The Complete Guide to Understanding Race in Mainstream Hollywood. So this seems like a very, very interesting book that also, it's revolutionary at the same time. Dealing with entertainment is something that may be seemingly a little enjoyable. But again, we've all, it harkens to me, what was it, Anthony Hamilton and Jadakiss' Why, right? Remember Why in 2001? Why did Halle have to have a white man pop her to get an Oscar? Why did Denzel have to be crooked before he took it? Right? So we have criticized the Oscar, at least in our communities, and without our discourse and cadence, have endured a lot of scrutiny. I can think of the Hollywood Shuffle. We can talk about Bamboozle and all those other things. So good for Dr. Frederick Gooding and his new book, Black Oscars, From Mammy to Minnie, What the Academy Awards Tell Us About African Americans. Let's follow that up with another book that's come out, Paulo's Diaspora, Black Internationalism and Environmental Justice by Kito J. Swan, who is a professor at University of Massachusetts. This book is published this year by the University Press of Florida. The description goes as such: Paulo's Diaspora is a sweeping story of black internationalism across the Atlantic, Indian, and Pacific Ocean worlds, told through the life and work of a 20th century environmental activist, Paulo Camarata Fago. Now, we haven't heard of him, and this book is why. Or I hadn't heard of him, and this book explains why. Challenging U.S.-centered views of black power, Kito Swan offers a radically broader perspective showing how Camarata Fago helped connect liberation efforts of the African diaspora throughout the global South without us even participating in it meaningfully. Swan explores Camarata Fago's remarkable fusion of political agitation and scientific expertise and traces his emergence as a central coordinator of major black internationalist conferences. Despite government surveillance, Camarata Fago built a network of black organizers that reached from Kenya to the islands of Oceania and included such figures as C.L.R. James, Queen Mother Audley Moore, Kwame Nkrumah, Sonia Sanchez, Philadelphia shout out, Sylvia Hill, Malcolm X, Vanessa Griffin, and Stokely Carmichael, better known to us as Kwame Ture. In a riveting narrative that runs through Caribbean sugarcane fields, Liberian rubber plantations, and Papua New Guinean rainforests, Paulo's Diaspora recognizes a global leader who has largely been absent from scholarship. Dr. Walter Rodney. Let's throw that name in there too if we're going to talk about international scholars. In doing so, it brings to light little known relationships among Black power, Pan-Africanism, and environmental justice. Now, I was embarrassed that after reading that description, I was almost entirely unaware of Dr. Paulo Camara Cafego. I know some Black nationalistic or Pan-African environmentalists in the U.S. Shout out to Carlton Waterhouse at Howard University. Shout out to Dana Matthew Bowen, who I believe has gone from Colorado to UVA and is now the dean at GW Law School or UVA Law School. She's up there. She's doing her thing. But I didn't know about this brother, so I had to look him up. Dr. Paulo Camara Cafego was a political activist, civil rights leader, parliamentarian, and world-recognized expert in ecological environmental engineering. Born Roosevelt Brown in 1932 in Middletown, Pembroke, he later changed his name to Paulo Roosevelt Osiris Nelson Brown Camara Cafego. He attended Howard Academy in Bermuda and went on to NYU, University of South Carolina, North Carolina, and obtained his doctorate in ecological engineering from the California Institute of Technology in 1959. Locally, he is best remembered for his work in universal adult suffrage and organizing the Black Power Conference in Bermuda of 1969. He was also a member of Parliament in Bermuda in the late 60s and 70s. He visited Australia to let the Black people of Australia know they were not alone. He is a true Pan-Africanist. He was a thoroughly transnational figure. He was a political mentor. His political mentor was the giant of Black intellectual culture, C.L.R. James. He worked in Liberia, Ghana, Kenya, and in the early years of their independence. In 1969, he helped organize that Black Power Conference and emphasized building Black community, the control of white violence, and the production of a positive Black political force. This is a powerhouse book for a scholar who needs to be known, much more well known within Black nationalist, Pan-African, and Afrocentric scholarship communities. Paulo Camara Cafego, congratulations on a great book to the scholar Kito Swan of University of Massachusetts and his book Paulo's Diaspora, Black Internationalism and Environmental Justice. The last book in our series for this week is Pleasure in the News. Oh, this is the one we should have done first because, again, we're dealing with media. Pleasure in the News, African American Readership and Sexuality in the Black Press by Kim Gallen, who is a professor at the University of Purdue. This was published by University of Illinois Press. The description of it goes as such. Critics often chastise the 20th century Black press for focusing on sex and scandal rather than African American achievements. In Pleasure in the News, Kim Gallen takes an opposing stance, arguing that African American newspapers fostered Black sexual expression, agency, and identity. And of course, to add on to believe that she believes that was important as far as part of Black freedom. Gallen discusses how journalists and editors created Black sexual publics that offered everyday African American opportunities to discuss sexual topics that expose class and gender tensions. While Black churches and Black schools often encourage sexual restraint, the Black press printed stories that complicated notions about respectability. Sensational coverage also expanded African American women's sexual consciousness and demonstrated the tenuous position of female impersonators, Black gay men, and Black lesbians in early 20th African American urban communities. And let me add my little take on that. I would hope that people also would look at the women and the MCs and sexualization in hip-hop and complicate the discussion. There is a room to talk about respectability. There is a room to talk about Frances Cress Welsing about not just respectability in front of other people's eyes, but in debilitating ourselves. On the other hand, we can also talk about liberation. We can also talk about procreation, right? As far as the positives within the recognition of Black sexuality. And also, again, we can also talk about the taboo of sex as a Eurocentric concept. So it's a very complicated issue. Very glad to see this book on the scene. It goes well with the other book that I mentioned first, Bad Bitches and Sassy Supermamas, Black Power Action in Films, where we take a empowering look at Pam Grier. Right? You can taboo Pam Grier for showing off her breasts or being sexually exploited within the black exploitation genre, but we can also recognize that Pam Grier is the first super action woman kicking behind, beating down women, men, or whatever, catching the bad guy of any race, of any genre that we know of in the United States. She's the first black superhero. So as much as we can talk about how it was a shame that she might felt that she had to, that she may not have a choice when it came to how much she wanted to show her body, on the other hand, it empowered a lot of folks, right? And there are lots of us who look at her as a hero and not as just a sex object, right? Although she was fine too. So let's admit that as well. And I don't think there's nothing wrong with saying that. All right, so we're going to conclude this. These are our books for this week: Bad Bitches and Sassy Supermamas, Black Power Action Films. Let me shout out again Del Wright and his book, A Short and Happy Guide to Bitcoin, Blockchain, and Cryptocurrencies. A shout out to what else? Black Oscars, From Mammy to Minnie, What the Academy Awards Tell Us About African Americans by Frederick Gooding Jr., Paulo's Diaspora, Black Internationalism and Environmental Justice by Keto Swan, and then last but not least, certainly, Pleasure in the News, African American Readership and Sexuality in the Black Press by Kim Gallen. So that's our report, our digest, our list of black books for the week. We'll be back next week again talking about black books and for our people, representing for Hakim's Bookstore, 210 South 52nd Street, West Philadelphia, between Chancellor and Walnut, Chancellor and Locust. And as we say always, we're going to better educate ourselves and our children, start and patronize black businesses and institutions, stop unduly criticizing each other, because that promotes the myth of black inferiority. Let's accumulate human, social, political, financial capital. That is the revolution that will never be televised. See you all next week. Hotep.